Welcome to Gracefully Graying. Here in Michigan, we have an aging population, and an aging population means that many people are getting divorced later in life or having multiple marriages. Today on Gracefully Graying, we will be discussing some of the issues involving what we call the gray divorce from a judicial perspective with my guest, Judge Lisa Langton, who is the presiding judge of the Oakland County Circuit Court Family Division. Judge Langton, welcome to Gracefully Graying.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Henry. I appreciate it. It's a good topic to talk about.
It's always a pleasure, and it's really an important topic. First of all, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your background and the areas that you cover with the Oakland County Family Court Division?
Okay, sure. So, my background is a private practice lawyer, and I was in a private firm in Birmingham for many, many years after law school. And I did family law with some of the best lawyers I know, still to this day. And prior to that, I was a clerk for a probate judge and a family judge while I was in law school. So I went to private practice and then sort of was recruited back to the courts many years later. And I started with the probate court and ended up as the family division administrator and the deputy court administrator for the circuit court. And during that period of time, we didn't always have a family division. So we didn't have a docket that was dedicated solely to family cases. And there was a big movement in the late 90s to say, these cases are really important and we should have judges and dockets that make them a priority. And so we created the family division. It was a legislative act. At the time, I was on the team that wrote our family division plan for Oakland County, which ended up being a model for the state of Michigan. So I sort of have been on the grassroots of our specialized court. So in family division, and we hear any kind of domestic case. So whether you're married or not married and you have children, we hear those cases: custody, paternity, support. We hear all domestic related cases. So any divorce for parties that are actually married, and that number is dwindling actually. We hear personal protection orders. We hear all juvenile delinquency and neglect cases. We hear adoptions. And interestingly, soon we're going to be hearing, and people are calling this the red flag law, but those that new legislation that recently passed, those are going to be heard by our family division judges. And in family division now, we have 7 amazingly dedicated judges that only hear family cases. So our division is growing. We started off with 5, and it's likely going to grow in the future because our number and dockets are increasing. But that's where I came from. In 2013, we had a vacant seat, and I decided that decision with my family that instead of maybe training the new judge, I'll run for judge. And so I ran in 2014, was elected, and just reelected last year. So it's my 9th year.
It's always been a pleasure appearing in your courtroom, and you always run a very, very tight ship, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Judge Langton,
Try to.
Why don't you tell our viewers how you would define what we call a gray divorce?
So having some gray myself, I'm not sure what the age, I'm not going to put an age to it, but I'm going to say that really it's for the more longer term marriages. So people that have been married, 20, 30 plus years. And sometimes that occurs when you're 50, 60. Sometimes that occurs when you're 60, 70. I guess it depends when you get married. But in my experience, the older you are, the less likely you are to be in this situation. I have had people as old in their 80s, married for 60 plus years, divorced. Not too many, actually, but I would say it's more common in your 50s and 60s. I think the older you are, the less likely you are to find yourself in our courtrooms.
Judge Langton, is a long-term marriage with a couple getting divorced in their 50s or 60s different than one where the couple have been married for fewer years and are younger, such as, for example, in their 30s or 40s?
For sure. And the biggest factor, and I'm always going to qualify this, but I'm never going to say never, but the biggest, these parents or parties going through a divorce aren't parents of minor children. So the whole issues of parenting time, custody support, those are not a factor in divorces with our older people, which really takes off a big portion of issues. So what we do find, though, is that people that have been married for 20, 30 years are older and more established in their careers. They have more developed financial situations. So either good or bad, right? So they have investments, they have IRAs, they have 401ks. Lots of them have trusts and estate plans. Many have already or are planning on retirement. So pensions and spousal support and Social Security, those are going to be issues that come into play. Some people have medical issues that might need long-term care. And so that's an issue that has to be dealt with in these types of cases. And, one that's really not, we don't really think about too much, but it's, where will I go? I call it, where will I go? So if you're getting a divorce, you're older, maybe you can't afford to, one person can't afford to stay in the marital home by themselves without the two incomes, or at least living in one household. You're talking about where will a person go? Well, I have to move in with my family. Am I going to be uprooted from my community and my friends? And can I afford to live in my area? So those are all issues that come into play, I think, with the people that have been married for longer term.
Those are very good points. What about the issues in a long-term marriage where one spouse has been stay-at-home mom raising the children, or stay-at-home dad to be equal, and has been out of the job market for many, many years? What happens in that situation?
So it really depends on your financial situation. All
Sure.
right. So if both people have been working, it's a different situation, but we still have a lot of family situations where one party, and it is typically mom, again, never say never, because I've seen some stay-at-home dads, more common now than in the older population, but they haven't been in the workforce for maybe never, okay, but some of them certainly haven't been in the workforce for 20, 30 years. And so that's an issue. Now, if their financial situation is stable and they have enough money when you divide it up between two people to comfortably support themselves, knowing other things to come and other factors, then that's good. But I really do see a lot of older people in their 50s, in their 60s, finding some sort of outside employment. Some people say, you know what, I've raised my kids. I know I'm going through a divorce. It's not good. I'm not going to sit home. I don't want to sit home. And so they go and they find some sort of outside employment. And it's really actually now easier, because as you know, we have so many open positions. I'm telling you what, and this is not where some people want to be, but you walk into a store, you walk into a restaurant, it's very common to see older people. Some people there by choice. I want to get out. I don't want to sit home. Like I said, my kids are gone. They're married. They have their own kids, their own lives. So they go back into the workforce. But some people out of necessity have to do it. So when you're talking about a tight financial situation, that gets tricky and that gets hard, and it makes the emotional toll of the divorce even more difficult, because if two people, there's going to be two sets of bills, right? There's going to be two utility bills. There's going to be, maybe they're renting, maybe they're, getting another small house or an apartment or something. And it's with the same income, it's just going to be really tight. And so some people out of necessity are going back into the workforce. And I've had people where, they're 50 and 60 and they go find a job, and it's not necessarily where they want to be, but sometimes it's where they have to be.
it can be hard for people. Absolutely right, Your Honor. Judge, should a 25 or 30-year marriage mean long-term or perhaps lifetime spousal support? And by lifetime, for the lay person, we're often talking about death, remarriage, or the further of the court, sometimes even death without remarriage being in there. But what are your thoughts on that, Judge Langton?
So the stock answer kind of is, usually. So you've been married 25, 30 years and maybe you never worked. And so when you get divorced, yes, there's usually a period of time where you will get spousal support. Here's the thing. Again, it all goes back to where are we starting with financially? So there's two factors that come into play. One is, does the person need it? So let's say I'm getting divorced. I haven't worked in 25 years, 30 years. My husband has always worked. He's got an income. Maybe he's still working. Yes, I'm likely to get some sort of spousal support. The difference that I'm seeing now with what's going on in people, unless money is no issue, and I can mention that in a minute, but is it's usually not lifetime. It's usually called modifiable. So even if I can get spousal support now, when my soon-to-be ex-spouse retires, which they will, that is an expected thing in life, or maybe has a health issue, which either forces them out of their current job or forces them to a lower paying job if it's physical and they can't do the same thing. They can come into the court and say, hey, you know what? Yep, I've been paying spousal support, but I can't afford to pay it anymore. And that's the worst situation, because if I'm receiving spousal support and that's my main source of income, it can be devastating financially. All right. And that doesn't mean there aren't other things. So if someone retires, let's say they retire, if I've got the divorce, I'm going to get a portion of that retirement, whether it's a portion of the pension, a portion of an IRA or savings, because that will have happened during the divorce. You'll divide those assets up. And there may be Social Security benefits that you're entitled to going forward. But again, it could be really devastating. I'm seeing less and less what you're calling, lifetime spousal support cases, and more modifiable. So I just tried a case a couple weeks ago where really both parties are financially strained, and one party's medical issues caused them to lose their job. They could no longer do the job they do. So the payer was going to retire, which means he couldn't pay spousal support anymore. And it's clear he could not pay. Well, the ex-wife was really reliant on that. So, I mean, her situation was going to be devastating. She's probably going to have to move in with a family member. And so it's tough, but we're just not seeing so many lifetime spousal supports anymore. That's just not where I think the trend is going,
That's important. I mean, there's so many variables, and I think that's what people have to be aware of, that
Right.
every situation is different.
Right.
Now, Michigan is a no-fault state, but there is fault when you're looking at property division or spousal support in a divorce. How important is fault in a long-term marriage and gray divorce?
It's really no different in a gray divorce than in a younger person's divorce, which because it is no fault, it plays a small portion of it. Honestly, it's not a big factor. Now, saying that, I will, people want to, say, okay, my wife had an affair, my husband had an affair, they shouldn't have the kids. Well, that might be happening younger. Or I should get more money. Well, yes and no. So how I say that is, if I'm having an affair and I dissipate marital assets, so I spend money on my boyfriend or my girlfriend, and I've taken it out of our marital assets, then fault will come into play, because the judge will likely say, okay, we're going to try to you're going to get less offending party, fault party, and the other party is going to get more because you took away marital assets. I mean, I have seen cases where a a man had a long-term relationship with a woman, bought her a car, paid for an apartment, practically bankrupt the parties, it was probably the worst case I've seen. But I've seen many cases where they'll come in and say, hey, look, this vacation, I thought he was on a business trip, but no, he spent all this money. And so fault comes into play when we try to restore the other person to whole, try to make them whole if we can, if there's enough left to do that. So that's kind of the most relevant portion when it comes into play.
That's important. Judge Langton, as we're aging, often cognitive issues can come into play. How does that come into effect in the gray divorce situation if someone is becoming cognitively impaired?
Well, we do have those cases. It doesn't happen too often, but we do have those cases. It would be common that a person might have a conservator or a guardian appointed for them. And if they do, then they participate, they actually sort of approve the divorce. So even though they're a party, the guardian or conservator would make sure that their financial position in the divorce is protected. And the guardian also helps deal with their placement and medical issues, those types of things. So that happens. Now, sometimes we've had cases where maybe the person is just a little forgetful, is mostly there. Sometimes family members help them, adult children help them, or we might appoint a guardian ad litem. And a guardian ad litem would say, hey, I need to help protect this person. And so they'll help be a voice and represent them. So we do have those situations as well, but we have protections for that. So when it comes into play, we make sure they're protected.
Judge Langton, before we sign off, are there any other factors that you think our viewers should be cognizant of with regard to the gray divorce situation from your perspective?
I think for me, the most important thing is to tell both parties, know what you have, be informed of your situation. So it's common in marriages or even just partnerships where one person pays all the bills, kind of takes care of the busy work, does all that sort of thing. Then there's a divorce and the other person has no clue. I don't know what our banks are. I don't know where our investments are. I don't know what our financial situation are. And it comes into play too if you've got a bad actor in the situation. If you have someone that maybe is dissipating marital assets. So when those bank statements comes in, look at them, know where your banking is, know where your money is being spent. Make sure you're putting away now what you can, the most you can, as far as matches and 401ks and pensions and all of that. Because the thing we don't have in a gray divorce is extra time. So when you're 20 and 30 and you get married, you're gonna you have time to make that income up if you lose some income in the divorce. But as we get older, we have fewer and fewer times. Make sure you have something in place and you're informed. It'll make the process way easier.
Judge Langton, these are very valuable points. I mean, plan ahead. And I think an attorney who's representing some of these situations would really help the client become educated. Judge Lisa Langton, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying. You've really covered some very important issues. And I want to thank our viewers and, of course, our sponsors on behalf of Gracefully Graying. Thank you again, Judge Langton.
Thank you, Henry. Best of luck to your program. It's excellent.
Thank you. I appreciate it.